We've got some breaking news from North Harris County where
Deputies say 2 men and women were injured in a domestic shooting and stabbing.
Investigators say one of the men walked in and shot the woman who is believed to be his ex-girlfriend.
Police tell us they're responding to the motel for a domestic
call when they got on scene.
They found the woman dead and her injured daughter.
Neighbors woke up to gunfire early this morning. And
Harris County homicide detectives are on the scene right now.
A man in his 30s showed up to his ex-girlfriend's home, armed with a pistol.
A Missouri City police officer appeared in court this morning.
Accused of assaulting her fiance with her police baton.
The man accused of setting his estranged wife's house on fire.
He then waited until his wife came out of the home and then hit her with his car.
A woman is recovering from cuts and bruises
after she says the man she met on the Bumble dating app held her against her will for 5 days.
A community remembers 21-year-old Angie Diaz.
29-year-old Wendy Duane.
A 25-year-old woman.
A local woman.
A Houston woman.
Was known as a hard worker.
With a happy personality.
A tragic loss.
We're breaking free from domestic violence, finding you solutions, connecting you to help.
Because no matter who you are, where you're from, or who you love, you deserve to be free from violence.
Breaking Free, our week-long initiative. We wanted to continue this very, very important conversation on our live stream, KPRC 2+. We thank all of you so much for joining us because this is a very important discussion that we need to continue to have.
Yeah, all week long we have been covering stories about breaking free, but it's been months and months that we've been talking about cases and stories in our own newscast, in our own community, about domestic violence cases, very sad cases, and we want to shed light on that. We want to talk more about it openly so we can help prevent, we can help people speak up, and we can give resources and information. So that's why we are here to do that, and we have asked our panel of experts to join us, and we thank you so much for joining us because you've been studying this, you've researched this, you see this and witness this on a daily basis. And so we come to you for answers and for resources, and so for our viewers, and so this is an open conversation.
Yes, we're going to start off with our first panel of guests and experts. We thank you all so much for being here. This is going to be for 90 minutes. So we're going to have 3 half hours of this information that is so important and so critical, and we're going to have different experts. But this first panel that we
wait,
have.
Before you say that, let's talk about the texting. You guys can text us your questions. We have some of our coworkers are here standing by wanting to answer your questions. They're going to relay the questions that you have to us, and we're going to ask the experts. That number that you need to text is on the bottom of your screen. So you can do that anytime, and then we'll get the text message and we'll try to answer your question as best we can.
Yeah, let's go ahead and introduce you to our first panel. We first have Rechna Correa-Daya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we also have Emily Whitehurst with Houston Area Women's Center.
And Dr. Elizabeth Gregory with the University of Houston, and Mr. Jaime Rivera with Catholic Charities. And so we're going to just ping pong some questions at you, but I want to first just start off by asking, what are you seeing right now in domestic violence? Because from what we've been covering and our reporters have been covering on the streets, like, we see it, I don't know if there's clearly a rise, but we're telling more and more of these tragic stories. What are you seeing in your organization?
So, of course, we're seeing, similar to what you all are seeing, the tragic stories that are making the news, but I think the other thing that we're really seeing is so much resilience. Mm-hmm. There's definitely an increase in callers at Daya. Our client volumes went up by 41% just over the last year. But we are seeing staff that are getting more collaborative. We work with all of these folks here, more nimble, more responsive, to be able to meet clients where they are, help them plan for their safety, whether they're in a position where they can flee that relationship, whether they have already fled that relationship, or whether they're still struggling to stabilize after fleeing.
It sounds like people are starting to speak up and to reach out. What's leading to that change? What has led to that change? Why are we hearing from more people now? And seemingly this is an issue that so many of us probably have dealt with or seen in one way or another in our families. I know I saw it with one of my relatives. Why are people speaking out now?
I think it's things like what you just said, the bravery it takes to say, hey, this is happening, has happened in my family, this has happened to me or to my friends, And collectively, our agencies are really working together to get our messaging on point, to be able to refer to the proper agencies to get people to the right places. And I think as more and more people are getting the help they need and improving their safety, they're encouraging others in their life to do the same.
Right. And we're seeing with a lot of the stories that we did, and please feel free to interject at any point because you know what your expertise is. You know, we want to have a conversation where we can engage and interact here. But we've also been seeing that this isn't just like a intimate partner domestic violence. I mean, this is going, we've seen domestic violence in seniors and in the LGBTQ community, you know, between children and parents. And so there's so much to cover and so much to talk about. I want to talk about the University of Houston research in the study that's been done. Just tell us a little bit about what is the most recent research that you've found with domestic violence and what's happening in our community right now, and especially since after COVID, because we saw a huge rise during COVID. A lot of families spending more time together. You know, people are losing jobs and people are getting sick.
Yeah, those
and it
tensions
really shakes, you know, a house to its core. And what have you found in your research?
Well, I guess there are two stories. One is that stress and a lot of different kinds of factors that are so unusual, like the lockdown where people were locked in with their abusers. And we interviewed one person who was being abused and she could hear the neighbor abusing his wife and yelling at her, you know, this is a pandemic, the police aren't coming. So there was this sense that the entire apartment building was in the same sort of stressful situation. So there was a lot of new pressure on people. They didn't have jobs. Their kids were home full time. That's another kind of pressure on people. You know.
For sure.
But at the same time, you have, as Rachna was saying, a lot of response in the provider community around innovating and trying to do more mobile advocacy, going into the community, using text hotlines and things like that, so that they were being more responsive to the community needs and trying to get the story out so that people would be able to, you know, say, I need help. Yeah. But as pointed out, there's also what we found looking at the data, and this is just from HPD and the sheriff, and there are actually 83 police departments in Harris County, so we're just looking at some of, these are the two biggest ones. The homicides doubled between 2019, before the pandemic, and this year. So, and they've been rising across those 3 years. So it wasn't like, okay, there was a spike during COVID and then it went down again. That spike has continued.
It's continued.
And then there
must be very concerning for what for what you're all seeing, right, in your organizations.
Yeah, one of the stories that I did, the story that I did was teaching young men and boys how to avoid becoming an abuser in the future. And one alarming quote I got was, my goodness, that 2022 was a nightmare. And at least in Harris County, and I'm sure probably reflective throughout the entire country on the heels of COVID. You all know these numbers from the Texas Coalition of Family Violence. 46 people killed in Harris County in 2021 by an intimate partner. That was up from 37 from 2020. And they don't have the numbers quite yet, but they believe in 2022 that number is going to jump to about 81, which is almost double from the previous year.
That is a data point that's known.
Yeah,
it has been.
They are reporting it. So, you know, there's never an excuse, obviously, but, you know, one of the reasons that I think you all can tell us that we've seen this increase is because another reason is that there were people, you know, abusers would be gone when they had jobs for 8 or more hours a day, and that would at least give the victim some type of break.
And
but
it's
now
time
they're
to be able to call for help.
Yes,
too,
exactly.
you know.
I think a thing we have to really be willing to talk about is the prevalence of guns. What would have potentially been a very harmful, hurtful, violent situation would not necessarily have been lethal, but for the fact that there's a gun in the home. If there's a gun in a home, someone is 500 more times likely
to use it,
to be killed. When people call our hotline, and we, like the other agencies represented here, have seen an enormous spike in calls to our hotline, which is a good thing in the sense that people are reaching out. But one of the first things that we ask is there a gun in the home? Because guns have become more prevalent in our community, and despite the best efforts of community organizations like ours to make sure that abusers don't have access to guns, that's not always feasible. So what I just think, the fact that y'all are having to go out again and again and again, scene after scene after scene, to homicides, that is most likely because of a gun. And it is, survivors are incredibly resilient and committed most times to navigating these situations and de-escalating. But there's not much you can do when it changes the entire dynamic. A gun in the home changes the entire dynamic. And we need to really be able to talk about that.
So are you all familiar with the U.S. versus Rahimi case? Yes. Okay. We reported that on our newscast today.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about it.
Yeah, please.
Let me just say that this is a very alarming decision by a panel at the Fifth Circuit, which is over Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi.
Based in New Orleans, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and what this means is, and people should know that the law that allowed a survivor to get safety from an abuser, known abuser, that a judge would say, you're a known abuser, you are no longer allowed to have access to your firearm. The Fifth Circuit said, no, that's not going to hold any longer.
Second Amendment rights trumped it, yes.
That's correct.
And
according to them, now it's not sound legal reasoning in my opinion, but I think we should note that in the midst of this alarming increase in homicides, we have a court saying, oh, let's just make these abusers even more access to guns. That's not right. It's not right.
73% of the homicides here in the past 4 years were committed with a gun.
Right.
And if those people hadn't had a gun, then they might have just been a fight.
Right.
So there wouldn't have
Which
been a
doesn't
homicide.
make it, and I don't want to minimize somebody in a situation where the gun is not the tool of choice.
Right.
Listen, this emotional abuse, financial abuse.
There's different types
There's all
of abuse.
kinds. So I want us to be aware of that. But when you're going scene after scene after scene to report on homicides, that's because we do not have the right attitude around guns in our community.
Hey guys,
Jason went
over here. We got a question that just came in. Want to ask you folks, what are the laws on threats and threatening behavior regarding domestic violence if it is someone who doesn't live with you?
Okay, so maybe not necessarily already engaging in, some sort of violence, but just like threats, and so this should be taken seriously.
Or an intimate partner that doesn't reside in your household.
Right. That's still an abuse.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we have to think about is escalation, right? I think when you're talking about threats, right, it can easily escalate into something that becomes more violent.
Right.
And so when we're talking about threats, either that's verbal or manipulation, whatever it may be, you're putting the survivor or the person in a very awkward position where they're having to reach out and say, I need support. But some of our communities feel that they may not have the voice to even make that outcry. And especially when they're dealing with vulnerable populations, accessing resources and being able to stand up and speak for yourself when you feel like you don't have a voice is very difficult.
So are receiving the threats a form of domestic abuse or violence? And so what should they do?
It's actually, that's like such an uncertain space. You were talking about psychological abuse, emotional abuse.
Right.
These are things that if you call law enforcement, there isn't much that can be done yet, right? And so this is where safety planning comes in handy so much. If you call one of our agencies, here's where we can help you
with
improve your safety for psychological abuse. There are threats that you can call law enforcement for, but depending on where you are, who you are, what language you speak, what is your immigration status, there's so many barriers why people are afraid to call. And if nothing comes of that police report or that call,
they may not call again.
Well, and that survivor may be at higher risk because now you've called the police on me.
Right.
And so it's a dangerous place. It's a dangerous thing to do.
Speaking of those barriers, what are some of the barriers that keep people in those relationships? Because a lot of folks looking on the outside, they would hear the situation and say, why in the world would you continue to take that abuse? But there are multifaceted the reasons why people stay. Talk about that part of it.
I mean, one of the things that we're seeing in our communities is that there's a type of manipulation that's going on in the household. And the abuser is making it seem that there's 100% dependence on them. For emotional, for financial, for safety.
For children, because of
definitely children too. And so there's an amount of responsibility that they're intentionally putting on that person that they're abusing to make them feel that I'm the one that's going to be dependent on, and you can't survive without me.
And what I'm so thankful about for us doing this kind of programming tonight is that people don't realize there are resources available.
Right, definitely.
And if you're in a situation where you feel like you're having to choose between being homeless, not being able to feed your kids, not being able to have any transportation,
Losing your immigration status,
or trying to just make it work with the situation that is not good and not safe and really tough, but my gosh, I can't take my kids out on the street. I can't lose my immigration status. But here's the good news. Programs like Catholic Charities and DIA and the Houston Area Women's Center, there are resources available, and that choice, that abuser is manipulating that situation to their end. It's not true. There are resources available, there are legal remedies, and there is safety. Now, that doesn't mean that it's everything that is so awesome, because you've talked a lot about affordable housing. The lack of affordable housing can be a real problem. Well, not just safe housing, but if you can't afford rent, if there's not anywhere to live that you can afford, we have a collective problem, because we are collectively then implicated in people being forced to stay in abusive situations because they can't afford to get out.
Well, and I will also say that, what we've learned is that domestic violence is rooted in control. And when the survivor flees the relationship, that's the most unsafe time. That's the time that they're at highest risk
Because the
for
abuser
homicide.
has lost that control. And
Absolutely. And then they become unhinged, and that's where we see these homicides happen primarily, and I'm sure you all see it. It's the person was fleeing or in the process of leaving, and that's when this homicide happened.
Along with that personal dynamic, there's also, when you step back, an element of group responsibility for putting people in circumstances where they are so impoverished. We have such low wages, particularly for women. And then our school system is not set up to allow moms to work consistently, because why does school let out at 3:30 when work doesn't let out till 5 o'clock? And so people get stuck in part-time jobs where they're bringing in very low wages, and there's very little affordable housing, and this makes people vulnerable. It does make them actually dependent for many resources. And once you're in a dependent situation, you become vulnerable. So there's a part of the dialogue for the community has to be about what is our responsibility around making women safe, as opposed to saying, especially moms, saying, that's your family, it's your problem.
We have another question over here.
Yes.
Hey guys.
Andrea.
Andrea, I'm a producer over here. We have a question. I need to find a shelter. I have nowhere to go. This person says I'm injured from being beaten.
Oh, goodness.
So luckily, Houston has a lot
steps.
of resources, and where's the first place they can go where they know they will be safe?
They should call our hotline, the Houston Area Women's Center hotline, and they can go to www.hawc.org.
What if they can't call? What if they can't search something because they're being monitored? Can they just show up?
Absolutely, they can show up, but they need to know where to go.
Right.
And how about being able to text as well? Because they could have someone in the room with them, but maybe texting is a little safer.
But here's the thing, a lot of that stuff is monitored.
Yeah, of course, obviously she's texting now, yes, yeah.
And I ask because a lot of the things are monitored. When you have your abuser, they're saying, who are you texting? Who are you calling? And so sometimes you don't have access to that.
Well, and here's the responsibility of us as friends and family. Instead of asking, why doesn't she leave, or this is not my business, can you offer somebody your phone to make that phone call?
Right.
Can you go on a walk with them?
Or their grocery store.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are ways that everyday people can help intervene. And when you call a shelter like Houston Area Women's Center, even if there's not space at the moment, because we work so closely together, we have ways to where we can quickly figure out where can you go.
So for this person who just sent us that, go to the Houston Area Women's Center. Can you, if they're watching clearly, so tell them exactly where it's located.
www.hawc.org. And that's going to be their best thing. They can chat or call and text.
The addresses are always confidential because of the safety issue.
Yes, obviously, yes.
That's very true. I do want to touch on something, and I think each of you could probably speak of your research or your organizations, is the cultural differences. I come from a Hispanic background where divorce or just acknowledging abuse is shameful, is to talk about it. And that's in a lot of cultures, not just a Latino, Hispanic culture. But how do you break away from that and break that cycle of having to live in that and just say, oh, just, you know, sweep it under the rug and act like it's not happening, and what happens inside your walls, it's your business. How do you get away from that?
We were just talking about this. I mean, between the Hispanic culture and the South Asian culture, this stigma against divorce is just, it's wild, you know? And one thing that we often get accused of, I'm sure y'all too, is you're breaking up families. And we'd like to, you know, what I try to do is switch that framework. Like, this family that is living in fear and violence is broken. And what we're trying to do is reimagine a healed family. And, you know, there are so many barriers, but I think speaking to somebody in your own language is helpful, and you could talk about that counseling.
I mean, I think that's something that we spend a lot of time on. Within our department itself at Catholic Charities, all of our therapists, clinicians, we speak Spanish and English. Because allowing the client, allowing the survivor to be able to express themselves in their language of choice and identifying with someone in their culture really makes that connection and breaks down the stigma of mental health.
I want to ask our producer real quick to run this interview that we have, because it's very prevalent as well as in the African American household. We did a lot of interviews this past week, and I want to see if Erica can run this interview real quick about cultural differences.
In the African American household, culturally, everything is kind of kept in the household. You're the strong Black woman. You can handle it. It's okay.
You can deal with this. Be that strong woman, and just a friend, she was told by her mother-in-law, like, just like submit and just do it for this. Just stay in it for the kids. And I was like, that is the worst advice you could give anyone. But
obviously
they were probably told that, or they heard that in some capacity. And so it's almost, you have to break that cultural cycle of, would you call it ignorance, or what would you call it, or just?
It's generational
abuse
and trauma. Absolutely.
It has something to do with TV shows like this, or just because everybody's part of multiple cultures, and part of the culture is letting people know that they don't have to, that's not the only option, that there are many versions of the way you can live your life. And it evolves. And it also has to do with what are your options in terms of employment for yourself, or, you know, just being able to define your own world in a new context. So, but that helps. That, again, what people were saying. If your friend can come up to you and say, you know, maybe this is what our grandmothers did, but we don't have to do this. And our grandmothers would want us to not be doing this. They want things to be getting better.
Yeah, we're talking about the shame and the stigma that within families, but you mentioned the two families, the two people who were being abused, they lived next door to each other in an apartment, so they knew what was going on. It's such a taboo subject, and people don't want to get involved, or they're afraid to get involved. They don't want to make things worse. But what are the best steps that someone can take if they can see a neighbor or a friend dealing with this to help rescue them and get them out of that situation?
How do you support somebody?
There's 3 R's that are really helpful. Recognize. Recognize that this is an abusive dynamic. Let's say in your observation of somebody,
like acknowledge it.
Acknowledge, recognize it, that. Respond, but respond in a way that isn't shaming. Don't ask, why do you leave? Ask, why don't you leave? Ask, how can I help?
And do it privately. I think that's a really important piece
Really
of
important,
this,
thank you.
having the conversation alone with the person that you're worried about, because you can make that situation worse if you try to call somebody out.
Or can I call someone for you?
Yeah,
maybe? Like, can I call the Houston Area Women's Center for you?
And we have a lot of friends and family members calling. And you know, the attitude is, I believe you. It's not your fault, and help is available. And then that 3rd R is refer. And the reason is because our staff are trained in safety planning, and are trained in being able to identify red flags or dynamics that could mean this situation is likely lethal. So what on the surface, because the person's been navigating it as best they can, might not look like a particularly lethal situation, there are key questions you can ask. One might be, has your abuser threatened to kill himself? Now that might not be something you'd think, but that's a question we ask on the hotline to really try and figure out how dire is the situation. So refer
What the abuser's mental state
what the
is.
abuser's mental state is. So refer to trained professionals. These kinds of dynamics are complex, and if it's somebody you know, inevitably you're going to be emotionally involved, and you're going to do your best, but so it's really helpful to make a call and a referral to organizations that are able to attend to the unique considerations of that caller and make sure resources are available.
Anyone else want to add to that? Anything
Some
to
of the
that?
best advice I heard is that survivors are in this situation where they are constantly walking on eggshells and having to think about this abuser. So the more you can focus the conversation on their needs, on their safety, on their emotion, it does not help to say, oh, that person shouldn't be doing that and how dare they, to focus the conversation on your person, on your loved one, because that's probably the first time that's happened for them in a long time.
Yeah. We'll speak about impact. We obviously know the impact that is on the individual facing the abuse, but when there are children or other family members in the household, they're witnessing this, experiencing this. Talk about the impact that it has on them, and not only at that moment, but potentially down the line in their future relationships.
I think children are often some of the most forgotten, we say survivors, but victims of domestic violence. In our residential campus, up to 40% of our clients are children, meaning they're living with mom in the shelter. And throughout our service delivery model, we serve children. Children who are witnesses to abuse, not even necessarily the victim, but witnesses, are more likely to either become a victim or a perpetrator. And
that's why it's so silly when people say stay for the kids.
Yeah. Yes.
We've had two clients be interviewed here on Channel 2, and both of them were, the precipice for them leaving was their children saying, Mom, you can't do this again.
Right.
We can't keep doing this. And their children pushed them to call our hotlines.
Oh, that's
and another thing we're seeing too is that a lot of the times they're saying, well, the kids didn't see it.
Yeah.
The kids are not aware of it.
Like a denial.
And then there's a denial of the fact that I can suffer silently myself when my kids are not part of this. But as soon as we open it up and have conversation with the kids and the family, the kids are aware of what's going on in the home.
Yeah, and when moms
Kids
thrive, kids thrive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. Okay, all right. Rechna, Emily, Elizabeth, and Jaime, thank you so much. This has been a great kickoff to
Thank you for
these 90
having
minutes for
hard
sure.
conversations, which we can do. They're difficult to have, but we can have difficult conversations, and I think just help with ideas and support. And thank you for all you do in your community and in your organization, because without you, our Houstonians would have nowhere to go. So
thank you for the platform.
And you're helping change the pattern.
Absolutely.
Doing our best for sure.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, though. I know.
We are going to continue our conversation, this very, very important conversation all week long. This is part of our KPRC2 initiative, Breaking Free. We started off our first 30 minutes with an amazing panel. We have amazing analysts and panels and experts that we're going to have throughout the next hour that we have left. And we want to begin with Amy Smith, Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, also Angelique Setchell. Thank you so much for joining us with the Montrose Center, and Christina Allen, Family Time Counseling. Thank you all for first of all, what you do, and thank you all for taking your time to be here to talk about this very important topic.
You all are experts at this, but you're also members of our community. You know, we all know someone who has somehow struggled with some type of abuse, and we've spoken a lot about physical violence, but there are other types of domestic violence and abuse that I think we don't really talk about, or we don't think that because it's not physical, it's not necessarily worth getting help for, or it's not calling somebody. And I'm talking about financial abuse, emotional abuse. Tell us the difference, really. Like, what is emotional abuse? Like, how? Give us an example of what that would be like for our viewers out there.
Well, emotional abuse basically is you're fat, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're the worst mother
Insults,
ever.
humiliation.
And totally. It's just like, you know, you can't do anything right, that you are constantly being told that you're less than, you're not as good, you know, you're wrong, you know, you're not important. And, you know, as we know, you know, the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt.
Which is so untrue.
But words hurt worse than anything else. I mean, it's kind of like, I liken it to that paper cut that you get, then you look down and your finger should be like, you know, spurting out blood when you see there's nothing. That's kind of what it's like. And what we've often been told is that it's harder to recover from emotional abuse because there's no outward signs of it.
Right, and sometimes you think, oh, it's not that bad because I'm not hurt, like physically hurt, you know.
Right.
But it's still, you have to validate that, and you can stop that and either go to counseling or you know. And that type of abuse is not only like from a spouse or a partner. That can be a parent, and that can be co-workers, you know. I feel like it's different levels, not just inside your home. Is that right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think about often is that this term over the past few years that has come up a lot is gaslighting.
Yeah.
And if you really look at what gaslighting is, it's abuse. And I worry sometimes that people don't recognize it as abuse because of the you know, verbiage that's involved with it. But when someone is trying to convince you that it's all in your head and they're trying to find out what are your triggers so that I can say the thing that's going to make you just,
or
you know,
control you.
Right, go over the edge, or what I know is going to really hurt you at your core, that is also a form of emotional abuse. And so when you think about, you know, the insults that you hear, we've actually had clients at Family Time that have told us, I would rather get slapped. I would rather get punched because my bruises will heal, but I always hear in my head those things that were said to me.
Yeah, Angelique at the Montrose Center, what are you seeing?
So some of the things that I would say that's really like the emotional are like, so serving the LGBT community is a little bit different in that a lot of times it can come from family, like you mentioned, or from their partner. They'll tell them, you know, there's something wrong with you because you're gay, or, you know, you're part of the community. You know, you need to go to church, you need medication, you know, there's something going on with you. If you weren't, you're sick, or, you know, I'm the only one that loves you and cares about you, no one else accepts you. And if they're not out yet, you know, they'll tell them, you know, I'm going to go tell your family, I'm going to go tell your church, I'm going to go tell your employer, I'm going to do all these things to ruin your life. And so it's, you know, they're not physically touching them, but in a lot of ways it's like, you're going to, you know, completely destroy my life if you out me. And then a lot of times they look to them as that's their only person they have. If their family already knows they're gay and they've kicked them out, that person's the only person for them. So it's like, what else do I do other than kind of take this? Because if not, I'm going to be on the street, you know, homeless or by myself. And
what type of help or resources are out there in our community for this type of abuse that seems to be extremely common, you know, especially if it's not just inside your house, it's also, you know, external. What type of resources are there in the community? Like, what should people do if they're experiencing this?
So one of the things that I would say I would encourage people to do is to reach out to one of the agencies that provides direct services, because often what you find is that through counseling, whether that's group counseling, support groups, peer support, or individual counseling, or as you mentioned, even any combination of family counseling, you can really get to the core of what is at the root of some of those behaviors. And so that's always a place that we start, because we know that people need to be mentally healthy just like they need to be physically healthy.
It can escalate into physical.
Absolutely.
Right? If it's not taken care of.
Right, absolutely.
Now, Amy, you mentioned signs and things to look for. I'm very cognizant of the fact that, at least right now, this half hour, I'm the only male at this table. I also have a wife and 4 daughters. And so the sad fact is the vast majority of victims in domestic abuse, domestic violence are women. So we talk about signs and what to look for. Talk about how important it is to start teaching our young girls as early as what age do you think to what to look out for, the signs to watch, and what to stay away from in terms of relationships that could draw them into an abusive relationship.
One of the things we do at the Coordinating Council is I facilitate the Adult Violent Death Review team, and we review domestic violence homicides. And one of the things that we discovered when we're reviewing these cases is that a lot of folks don't understand that they're in a domestic violence relationship, because that's the only relationship they've ever known. That's what they grew up with. That's what they have continued on with. So it's really important to talk about healthy relationships, talk about what is a healthy relationship, and to start as young as possible.
And boundaries.
Boundaries, talk about healthy conflict, communication, and what are your boundaries, because that's really important, and not just your boundaries on your finances, on spending time with family and friends, what your sexual boundaries are, everything, and take that into consideration. If someone blows past your boundaries, that's a red flag. Right. If someone starts to isolate you from your friends and family, that's a red flag. And so it's important, if someone wants your password to your social media accounts, that's a red flag as well. If you're constantly getting text messages,
very controlling.
Where are you? Why aren't you home yet? Who are you talking to? Who are you with?
Red
But
flag.
a constant barrage of text messages,
Y'all, I got another question over here. I hope you don't mind me butting in.
Right.
So.
Yes. Yeah. Jason.
Yeah, sorry to butt in here, but I think this is going along with your topic. We just got a question from a guy who says, I'm a guy who has been hit by a woman before. I didn't want to report her, but I knew I needed out. I had a cop help me. Does this happen to other men?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we know that it does happen to men, and one of the reasons that it's not reported that much is because there's shame in it. But yeah, please help him answer
We've
that question.
done several interviews. We'll try to get our producers to kind of cue those up for us in a minute. But first, is this something that you're seeing in your organizations, is abuse between whether it's a male partner or whether it's women abusing men, like this person who just sent us this text message?
Absolutely. I will say it happens to men, and it happens to men probably more than any of us know because of the underreporting, right? And I think we can't have that conversation without talking about the social norms and the cultural reasons why men feel ashamed, embarrassed, often to come forward and say, I am being abused, because all of those masculinity stereotypes and the ideologies that people have tell men from a very young age as boys that you're supposed to be tough, and you don't let a girl beat you up. And so then often those men have come from households where they witnessed abuse as a young child, and they often have been abused by someone themselves. And so they get into these relationships. And because most law enforcement officials are still men, there's an embarrassment with even calling the police and having another man show up to your home
and having to
explain that I'm the victim, right? But we do have men who come to our shelter. Our shelter is open to men, and we have had men who have gone through our counseling programs, and they have always left and said, I want to take my success story and share it with other men and let them know you don't have to stay in that situation, and you don't have to be ashamed or embarrassed.
Yeah, Angelique, and the Montrose Center, talk about from that your perspective there when it was male and male domestic abuse.
Yeah, so obviously, like we talked about, the shame, the guilt that comes from the part of being LGBT as well, but also the shame and guilt of oh, I'm another man. A lot of times unfortunately, the police go out and they're like, well, you're another man, why don't you just fight him back? And not understanding that even with a man and woman or a man and man, that's a power control dynamic, So it doesn't matter if, one is 6'5" and 200 and some pounds and the other one's, 4'9" and, 110 soaking wet. The 110-pound could be, beating up the tall, bigger person, and it's that power and control, that person that is, controlling the relationship, controlling that person, and breaking them down and doing all the emotional abuse and financial and, physical, all those things. And so it can really break down somebody and manipulate them and make them feel like they're less than. And so a lot of that shame and guilt is there. And so it's like, well, how do I go forward and tell people? And then if I do call the police or have in the past, it's made it worse. I get re-victimized and those kinds of things happen. And so it's like, what do I do then? Or where do I go?
Right. This week, one of our reporters did a whole story on men being abused. And we heard of one that talked about the embarrassment, and we heard about another one who was actually physically hurt, like cut with a knife. So I'm gonna ask my producer, Erica, to roll those 2 interviews for us so we can hear what they have to say.
I won't even say kind of. It is embarrassing to just be, singing a song about what's going on in your household, especially between a relationship between you and a woman. I was cut by with a knife. I actually literally had a camera on and she tried to run me over with a car.
But what we really try to navigate with them is that violence can happen to anyone, all genders, all races.
It is very, very obvious when we talk to them that we understand what they're saying and what they're going through.
The text that we got from Jason's text there, and from what we've heard, the stories that we've run, obviously it is something that is happening to men, and men kind of need to put the masculinity thing to the side and speak up if they are victims of abuse.
And also too, most boys are taught you can't hit a girl,
right?
And so that has a lot to do with it as well. Is that
not defending
not
themselves or not wanting to do anything about it.
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
There was this one interview, and I think it was that same gentleman, where he talked about he was abused by his mom, and his mother was abusive, and so he
was used to it.
He was used to it, so he took that abuse from his partner, and she cut him. I think he was cut
with a knife.
With a knife, and so he realized at that point, I'm just accepting it because I lived it. That's what I. That's what I did.
That goes back to healthy relationships, to know what a healthy relationship is, because that's just
identifying.
That's just what is normal. For
Question over here.
Okay, Andrea, yes, please.
Hey. We know a lot of times people worry about what is next after they leave. This question, is there free or reduced cost legal representation for domestic violence survivors who are going through divorce and custody issues so they don't lose their children to their abusers?
Yeah, if you have a more of an advantage or the breadwinner, then you maybe have a little bit more legal services and those resources. So what can people do if they don't have the money necessarily to fight and attempt to keep their children in custody, these custody battles?
The court system can be really, really overwhelming, especially if you're coming from an abusive relationship. That just adds to the stress that you're already dealing with.
There are several legal services agencies here in Harris County. There's AVDA, Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. There's the Texas Advocacy Project, who I think is going to be on your next panel.
I believe so.
And then there is Texas, there's Lone Star Legal Aid. So there's a lot of different, there's Houston Volunteer Lawyers. So there's a lot of different, depending on the situation, there's a lot of different places that are available to
financial help
just reduce costs, not reduce costs for their legal representation. And if you would like to get a protective order, there's no cost for getting a protective order.
Okay.
And so also, we're very fortunate that we have so much community support as agencies. So we have a lot of supporters who are attorneys, top-notch family law attorneys that say, I will donate X number of hours per year to your agency. So when we get certain cases and we think this is one that we need to, send to that attorney, and they do it on a pro bono basis just because they want to help and they recognize that everyone cannot afford that good legal representation. And they also know what it's like. If you walk into that courtroom and you're going up against your abuser who has really strong representation and you don't, that's an uphill battle most of the time. And also, to your point about re-traumatizing the survivor, it can be very intimidating and traumatizing to have to even go through that court system and that experience legally. So we often rely on our partners too, who just help us because they know they have the skills and the talent, they know how to navigate the system, and they want to give back.
It's like being re-victimized.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. Sometimes we will see abuse and maybe our friends don't necessarily, or family don't want to talk about it because they're ashamed or they're scared, or family. If we are witnessing it or we see it, like, what is the best way to approach that person and ask them, offer them help or offer them support without, because they're hiding it, it's happening, and they may not want to be open about it. Like, what are the right words to say when you think it's time to speak up?
Well, I think some of it is are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? I believe you. I'm here to support you.
I think that I believe you is great, because if you ask someone if they're okay, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm good, everything's great, like that. But this I believe you thing, I think, validates what they're feeling, right, and what they're going through, what they're going through.
And what we do know is that if someone asks, a lot of times someone will open up because they want to talk about it. They don't want to be the first person to approach and to bring it up. But they want to make sure, you want to make sure that, and you can ask, are you safe? I have some resources that are available. I will go with you to the court. I will go with you. I will be there with you. We'll go through this process with you.
We mentioned the court system just a second ago. Let's talk real quick about holding abusers or perpetrators accountable. We actually have Erica. We have sound with a woman that we heard from just earlier today who wanted to make sure that her ex was held accountable. Can you roll that for us, please?
I knew at that point that I was my best advocate, and if I wanted him to be held accountable, I was going to have to be a squeaky wheel. I did all my research, basically was a legal assistant.
She made sure, she showed up to all of his court appearances. He would try to go and get his probation altered, have his charges dropped, and she made sure she showed up so they would see that there was an actual human being who was on the other side of it. How important is that to take those steps?
Well, it's important that survivors are not just a number, that they're not a checklist.
It's just a case number.
They're real people, and it's a shame that domestic violence survivors have to push for and have to advocate for themselves. There are tons of agencies that have legal advocates that will be more than happy to help as well. But I always tell survivors, introduce yourself to the prosecutor, introduce yourself to the probation officer. Call and introduce yourself, because let them know you're not just another case, you're not just another nameless victim, that you have a story, and your story is important, and your story is unique to you, and you need to get that across.
I want to remind our viewers that we are receiving text messages right now. You'll see a number at the bottom of your screen. You can text us any question that you may have, and we will ask our experts here, try to answer your questions. They have a lot of resources, and we have some of our producers over there who are getting some of those text messages. Do you have some new ones for us? Okay.
Now, actually, and I think you guys are striking a really good chord right now, because our question just came in was, many people don't even know or even want to get involved to make domestic violence stop. How should someone go about getting involved? So I think it's a good conversation.
Yeah, and I guess from different angles, could that be from someone who's actually on the inside of it? Could that be a neighbor? Could that be a family member? What are the first steps that need to be taken?
So I think there's a couple of ways that you could actually answer that question. So if it's someone that you know personally, I think it goes back to the point that was made earlier, asking questions and keeping the focus on the person that you believe or you know to be the one being abused. To say, I'm concerned about you, and I want to know, if there's something I can do to help. asking questions, not so much giving advice or not saying, I think you should leave, because we know that that often puts that person who's being abused in a situation to where they feel like you're trying to take away their right to make decisions about their own life. But expressing the concern, it may take more than one conversation. It often does. It takes survivors on average 7 times before they leave for good. And so we know that this is not necessarily the first time you mention it. Someone will say, you know what, yes, I'm being abused, I'm ready to leave, and it's cut and dry. I think being realistic about that.
And sometimes the hardest part is for the abuser to recognize and say, okay, this is a problem, you know, because they're so used to enduring it, for them to actually acknowledge it, I think, is a huge step. I want to remind also everybody watching that I know our experts are giving a lot of information, and their resources, their organization, of all the panelists and all the resources that you may have, that you need. It's on a QR code. Just look at your screen and grab your camera if you can't write any of this down, and just hold up your camera to this QR code, and it'll take you straight to our website where you can see all of the resources, and there's a lot of answers there for you. Houston is so lucky to have just great organizations like the ones you're in and representing. So there is help for everyone. The first step you have to do is what? Is just recognize and make that call, right?
And what we like to say is to recognize, respond, and to refer. So like you recognize everything. Also, just one really quick point is just to make sure, to answer this question, is just to make sure that you're safe. Because when an abuser, when someone is getting ready to leave, that is like actually the most dangerous time for a victim, because if you think about it, the abuser's losing their power and control, and they're losing the power and control over their victim. So it's really important to make sure that you're safe and that the survivor is safe. So just make sure that you are concerned about your safety as well, because we do know abusers could injure other folks as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are dangers in leaving, unfortunately.
Our producers are waving us over there.
Or Andrea, yes, please.
Hey, y'all. We have another question here. What is trauma bonding? How do I know if this is me?
What, trauma bonding?
Bonding.
What is trauma bonding? Okay, I don't think I've heard of that one. Can you, trauma bonding?
Have you heard of that? Trauma bonding? Maybe it's something like you're used to.
You bond with the person who's traumatizing
or
you?
you feel sorry for them, like you don't want to get them in trouble. Like what have you heard in your industry?
A lot of times, like especially like with our community, they go through a lot, you know, being part of the LGBT community, you know, they both have similar stories, you know, their families have been mistreating them, and they've gone through some adversities, and you maybe have been bullied, and so you tend to relate and associate, you know, yourself with that person and see yourself inside that other person, and so it's hard, you know, you bond through your trauma, and so it's hard for you to see like, okay, this person is abusing me and doing things that I don't deserve. But you tend to feel sorry for them and understand, you know, where they're coming from and what's going on. So you're kind of in that thing, well, we can work to fix each other, we can help each other, you know, kind of all that codependency stuff that goes along with trauma bonding. And so it's really hard to kind of separate sometimes. And so you have to like be able, like we talked about earlier, those boundaries, those healthy relationships. What does that look like? Is this healthy? You know, am I stressing out all the time? Am I feeling like I have to hide things from my family, my coworkers? You know, all those kinds of things. What's impacting me, my mental health, my physical health, all those things going on. And if you tend to see yourself, you know, having a lot of difficulties in those areas, so then maybe you are experiencing those trauma bonding things, and you have to be able to maintain those boundaries and be able to make a decision like what is best for my life, and you know, can I move on and move away from this person.
I did see a story, Heath, about someone being abused, saying, well, they were abused, and so this is part of their story, and almost, you know, not excusing them and saying because they were physically abused, that's all they know, and that's why they're doing that to me, therefore it's okay, or we're getting them help. But at one point, do you say they need professional help? I can't be the only one that's helping you. You need like outside help.
Yeah, it almost, I don't know if this is the exact definition of trauma bonding, but it almost sounds like that syndrome in World War II where people would start to sympathize with their
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, Stockholm syndrome. Yes, there you go. Yes.
Yes.
So you start to sympathize with the person who is actually abusing you. And as Daniela said, you're thinking, well, wow, they went through a lot of abuse themselves, and so I understand it, and I'm going to get them through it. But staying in a relationship like that is not worth it.
They need professional help. Yeah.
Well, and also I would like to the person that wrote this question, if you are concerned about it and how do you know if this is me, reach out. Reach out. There's y'all have tons of resources listed on the QR code. So just reach out and talk to somebody, because I really think that is your best option.
To help them identify if this is something they can get help.
If you're worried or concerned about this, reach out and get some help.
And you know, it's interesting. We saw a phenomenon during COVID with our survivors, and many of them, particularly those who came to our shelter, would come to the shelter, and after a while they would say, you know, I've been thinking, I think I'm going to leave and go back. My abuser lost his job during COVID. He got COVID and he had to be quarantined, and he had to miss, you know, his brother's 30th birthday party, you know, and there was a lot of the sympathizing that happened. We also saw some interesting things happening. If you remember when the COVID relief checks were given out to people. And a lot of abusers reached out and said, oh, I'm better now because I have some financial relief, and that's what was making me be abusive. So why don't you come back and let's give it another try. And you know, we always give our clients the opportunity to make their own choices, and what we say is we're always here. If you ever need to come back to us, we're here. But we give them, you know, that opportunity to make their decisions. But we saw a lot of that, and it was a lot of empathy and a lot of sympathy during COVID, because the stress of the pandemic was why the abuser was being abusive.
But it also sounds like it's going back to that manipulation and control that's ultimately at the center of this.
So common. Well, Amy, Angelique, Christina, thank you so much for joining us and for all of the incredible information. And again, just scan that QR code. You will be able to find information on their organizations and all the resources in Houston. We've had some difficult conversations, but really important ones. And so we are grateful for allowing us to do that with you.
And thank you for what you do every single day for this community.
And we're just grateful that y'all took the time out this week to do this, because it's very important, and we are very thankful that y'all are shining a light on it, because it's needed. So thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate that.
We appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll take a break, right?
We will be right back. We are continuing a very, very important conversation on KPRC 2 Plus, part of our week-long initiative, Breaking Free. A lot of reasons that we are doing this. One of the reasons in the news business in the last couple of months, last couple of weeks even, we've just seen so many cases of domestic abuse and domestic violence.
Different types of abuse.
Yeah. January 5th, a woman shot and killed by her husband. Harris County law enforcement said that the couple had a history of domestic violence. January 3rd, just 2 days before, there's a woman recovering after she met a man on Bumble, and he held her against her will for 5 days. You all know about that. Assaulted her during that time. He is now out on bond. And so we've noticed that in the last few months, in really much of 2022, we saw such a huge increase in these cases, and we wanted to do something about it and see if we could help.
And many of these cases end tragically. And what we want to do is have these hard conversations and just let our viewers know that there are resources out there so it doesn't escalate to these types of stories. And we can prevent, or we can get help if we can't make those changes, and we can set boundaries. And as difficult as it may be, and although families may be, torn apart by many of this, by a lot of these decisions and difficult decisions that have to be made, there's a need. And so we have asked you to come on and tell us what's going on in your organizations, legally, and all these nonprofit organizations we've been talking to. And so let's start off with
Introductions.
Introductions,
Yes, we have a new panel. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll start with Amanda Elkanik, Texas Advocacy Project.
Yep, that's me.
All right, Maisha Coulter with AVDA, which is the Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. And we also have Mr. Anthony Asso. You're a prosecutor. You're with Harris County District Attorney's Office, and you're also with the Domestic Violence Division.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all, for being here, for sure.
Anthony, let's start off with you, just because all of these stories that we've been reporting, I've seen you on TV. We've interviewed you about many of these cases, which is unfortunate because all of the things that you were seeing. What have you seen recently, and the rise that you're seeing? Legally, what are you seeing in your cases? What are most common right now?
Just a lot of, like we talked about, just a rise in domestic violence. I mean, I think all types, from assaults all the way up until murders. And so just the courts being flooded with cases, and really just, I mean, that's really all I can say. That's what I'm seeing legally. And then we're fighting in court to make sure that the abusers, that we can intervene to keep them, maybe argue at bond, or make sure that there's a protective order in place to keep victims or survivors safe from them. But that's what we're seeing. A lot of those arguments, us stepping in at the first part to make sure that we can make sure the community is safe, and also that the survivor in a situation is safe.
Yeah, for the survivors, the court system can be so overwhelming and so daunting. And especially if their abuser has the financial control over them, they don't have financial means. What are things that are being done, or what's some advice you can give to a victim who is going through it to help navigate that legal process, and just make that process a little better?
Right. I mean, like you mentioned, the financial barriers, the courtroom barriers, and then the familial barriers are daunting, I think, for survivors. And so I hope that they know that we're here to listen, and then that we can in court, and we'll do everything that we can to make sure that not only are we arguing, there are 3 positions when it comes to bonds, right? And I think that's a hot topic right now.
Yes, it is.
But we have a position, and we're going to fight in court to make sure that there's a sufficient bond in place to hold an abuser accountable, and to make sure that they can't harm the victim or the survivor, and they can't harm anybody else in the community. But additionally, we're going to make sure that we file motions and request not only protective orders, but we also request the court to place bond conditions, not allowing people to have firearms, monitoring alcohol, and monitoring drug use, to make sure that if that's a source of why abuse is occurring, that we can try and put a stop to it, and exclusion zones so that they can't go near the survivor in specific cases.
I'm sorry. I looked over at Maisha on this because I interviewed her about this specific topic just last week, and we talked about it on the newscast today at 4:30.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the court system and that the really big case, the U.S. versus Rahimi.
Yes.
Yes. Kind of give us a little bit of insight, a little background, and just what that is, how that's changing the environment.
Sure. So it's a federal case, and what has happened is the person who had been charged with a crime was also had a protective order in place. And protective orders usually have language in it that says that that person is prohibited from having a firearm. And what happened in this particular case is he was in trouble, and they enforced the firearm prohibition against him because he violated his protective order. What he did was sue and say that his Second Amendment rights should supersede his rights related to that protective order and the restrictions related. And unfortunately, the Fifth Court of Appeals, which is where Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana have their cases heard on the federal level, agreed with the judge that gave the state a decision. And so ultimately what that case does is it calls into question whether or not those prohibitions that we have all been effectively using for many years, probably 100 years or so since protective orders have been in place on whatever level, whether it be federal or state level, that now that is called into question. It's overturned by this particular circuit, and then potentially will go to the Supreme Court just based on how things usually track. And so it's all under question at this point.
Yes, and so how could that impact those who are abused?
Maisha, would you say that, so what we know about this federal court, the overturning of this was, that's the federal court. But in Texas, we have specific language in our protective order statutes that is very similar to that, that says, hey, you can't have a firearm if you are subject to a protective order, right? And I think what happens right now is we have a lot of media attention around this overruling of out of the Fifth Circuit Court, and a lot of survivors who are afraid, oh no, my abuser has, I have a protective order against my abuser who had to give over their weapon. Does that mean that they're going to get their weapon back right now?
And that is not what it means. But what it calls into question, and what it probably lends itself to, is that someone on a state level in a protective order that the DA's office gets or ABDA gets on behalf of someone can now make similar arguments in those circumstances to probably, and have that case be supportive to their position. So that's the unfortunate part of it. Realistically, protective orders as we provide them in the state, on the state level, will continue to have the prohibitions related to firearms in them until such time as there is a change either legislatively, or if the courts are made aware of a lawsuit that would bring this whole thing to us in that way.
I want to remind everyone, we are receiving your questions. We want to hear from you. So there's a number that you can text. It's at the bottom of your screen, 1-866-996-5772. We have producers over here at this table, and they are reading your text messages to us. So as we continue this conversation, they're just going to yell out the question, and we're going to get our panelists here to answer them. Andrew, do you have one?
Yeah, I have a question right now. This person says, I'm having a hard time finding resources. Is there a phone number I can call? Also, my abuser violated restraining and no contact orders, and I just don't understand why nothing is done. I have so many questions to ask.
So, okay, let's start off by telling her that you can scan our QR code that's on your screen right now. Just grab your phone and go to the picture, like you're going to take a picture, and just scan the QR code. There are all the resources. It's going to take you directly to our website. You can find a lot of resources from our panelists, nonprofits, different sort of resources in the community. So start off by doing that. In the meantime, let's answer her question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who wants to start off?
Yeah. How does that happen? Obviously, there's a lot of fear there. What steps can she take, because she feels as if no one, that her abuser
is violating that
has
restraining.
carte blanche, so to speak.
So there's two things to be concerned about. If it is a civil protective order or a no contact protective order, then it should be up to law enforcement to actually do something about a violation of a protective order. It can also be brought back to the court that issued the protective order. So if it's a civil protective order, it would go back to the 280th court in Harris County or the issuing court. If it is a restraining order and there is a pending lawsuit, it goes to the court that issued the restraining order. And there's a difference. A lot of people will call them the same thing, but in our state, restraining orders have a different connotation than a protective order does for us in Texas.
Anthony, what should she do?
And I can't speak to exactly what steps she may have already taken. I think the first step when we're talking about violating a no contact order is going to be to call the police. That should be your first move. From there, that can amount to additional charges against someone that's violating that contact order. Also, if they're under that no contact order because they're already charged with a crime, that gives the judge a reason then to revoke the bond, and they can be remanded back to custody.
I don't know why she's saying nothing is being done about it. You know, that's not clear, but if nothing is being done about it, then should she just continue trying to reach out to law enforcement?
Yes,
Okay.
and other resources too, outside of maybe the criminal process. I think that there's providers and things like that that could help out. And one of the things I wanted to touch on earlier, because you talked about the barriers to the criminal process. At our office, the district attorney's office, when a case is filed that involves domestic violence, we're going to have a caseworker assigned to that case. And so not only there are going to be attorneys that are handling the legal portion of it, but we're going to have social workers and caseworkers working with survivors to help them create some sort of exit strategy from relationship, as well as a safety plan.
Yeah, we want their safety is so important. Jason, I saw you raise your hand. Did we get another text message?
Yeah, we did get another message, and it goes along with law enforcement. We all know you guys work with law enforcement, but the main question that we have here is do they have any type of training that they are able to utilize
when they arrive on scene?
Yeah. What kind of training, if any, do police have regarding domestic violence?
So we actually offer a TCOL accredited law enforcement training. It's 8 hours. We train all over the region. So every peace officer can attend those trainings, get credit for it, and it is filled with information. So how to respond to a survivor as well as the perpetrator, how to do best practices as far as asking questions on the scene. We talk to them about safety as far as their own safety, because those calls can be dangerous. We train on being trauma informed. We train on the laws that they're going to pursue. So if they're arresting somebody, what are the potential charges that they could make in regard to the behavior that the person has been, alleged to have made. We talk to them about the fact that they may go to the same residence over and over and over again, and to be able to maintain their empathy when they are responding to people over and over and over again. But I think it's a well thought out training, and we get very good feedback from those who are in law enforcement. And we're talking about people who are in family violence units and people who are just line officers who also, arrive on the scene but may not necessarily have a background or that be their primary focus as far as their career in law enforcement.
Right, yeah, we know law enforcement, they play such a critical role. We actually have a soundbite, Erica, if you could roll that from Harris County Precinct Sergeant talking about what is needed in an investigation of this type.
When you don't say anything, you are helping that situation to continue. And we don't want that. We want you to report it to us, allow us the opportunity to do our due diligence in investigating it.
Having faith in law
people to reach out,
enforcement, and that they'll do the right thing. I want to ask you, sometimes, especially within like an intimate relationship, like just the thought of putting your partner or your spouse in jail or in handcuffs, and having to explain that to your children, I think is a very difficult decision to make.
And then to the family members involved.
And to the family members involved, and having them believe you. So how do you know it's time? How do you know that that's the right thing to do? Because the last thing you want to do is have to live with the fact that you have to tell your kids, like, I put dad in jail, or vice versa. And sometimes we try to protect their image. so they don't know what's going on. And so I feel like that is something a lot of people don't talk about because there's a lot of shame in that, but it's a conversation to have.
Sure, I think that's a great question. When we look at even different communities and contacting law enforcement and reaching out to law enforcement, that might be a barrier for them to begin with, because there's a lot of fear behind police and what that's going to cause on their family and what could happen whenever they respond to the scene to begin with.
It will affect their future.
Exactly. And so when we're working with survivors, one of the things that we want to do in a safety plan is to ask them, is to give them the choice to say, what does justice look like for you? And give them that power back. And so it might not be calling the police and having them arrested, right? But we want for them to know that hopefully that the police that are responding have been trained and that they are trauma responsive and that they have the resources to connect that survivor with whenever they're on the scene. But at the end of the day, it's your job to protect your safety, right? And if you feel like your partner is going to kill you, maybe they've threatened to kill you, maybe they've threatened to kill your children, maybe they have a weapon in the home. These are real threats that survivors survive every single day. And so navigating their own safety is part of their daily life. And when it gets severe enough that they feel like they need to call law enforcement to come out because that's the only thing that will save them in that moment, that is an important decision to make. One of the things that we tell survivors is, guess what? You're not the bad guy in the situation. You did what you had to do.
Even though it feels like it.
Even though it feels like it, for sure. Guess who's the bad guy? Right? The
abuser,
DA's office can be too.
Yeah.
They take that. They say
Not
no.
Anthony.
No,
The DA's
it's not
office.
the victim. It's not the victim versus the abuser for this crime. It's the state versus the abuser, and they have committed a crime that they need to be held accountable for.
Well, Andrea, one of our producers has a text.
Hey guys, earlier we talked about that a piece of advice for the victims was to get to know the prosecutor, get to know the probation officer of your accuser, so they see you more as, you know, a person instead of just a case or a process. So the question is, after we said that, they sent in the question saying, how do I find out who the prosecutor and the probation officers are in the case?
What's the process?
The best way to do that would be to call the Harris County District Attorney's office. You'll want to tell them your name and the defendant and the case number if you have it. And
they'll give them that information?
Yes, and they'll forward your information, probably email, and then your desk line. And that's a good way to get in contact with your prosecutor. Also, you're going to have a victim assistance coordinator on many cases, and they're a really great liaison between a survivor and the prosecutor who might be bogged down in court that morning and you can't get a hold of. The victim assistance coordinators, they're kind of the person there that's going to make sure that you're heard and that your concerns are relayed to the prosecutor.
Yeah, this is really a team effort. It's the legal system, it's law enforcement, it's advocates, it's the community really. It's also the state legislature. What is being done at the state legislature in Austin? What has been done even in recent years to help end this terrible scourge?
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of activities. Yesterday was Capitol Day, and so there were a lot of our comrades, on the scene there, talking about the different legislation that we hope will be helpful for this upcoming session to help protect victims, to make sure that the right consequences are happening. There is some legislation around the gun safety issues that continue to be a problem in our state and, of course, in Harris County. There's some legislation just to shore up some of the things that are already in place, maybe to elevate crime so that the consequences are more severe. So that's the way, generally speaking, legislation gets planned out. But there are lots of agencies and organizations that's their primary focus is on policy and legislation, and they come to us who are in the nonprofit space and who are on the front lines dealing with the clients and try to assess what are those needs. What our state has a state plan around survivors of domestic abuse, and it incorporates exactly all of us in terms of what are our roles and responsibilities. You asked, the caller said, it's not just about the person who's being charged with the crime. The state is offended by that behavior, right? We as a community are offended by that behavior. If someone were to do the types of things that we see happening in intimate relationships, if they were a stranger, everyone would say that's horrible, it shouldn't happen. But because it is an intimate relationship, we somehow make an exception, and that should actually be reversed, right? We should be thinking about these situations more substantially than even those that happen from a stranger to stranger situation.
I mean, I think the need is so big out there. We're offering, you know, there's a phone number at the bottom of your screen, and we're asking you to text us your questions, and we're getting questions. So we do want to get to that. That's why we're here. Let's see if, Jason, do you have any new ones?
We have something that came on the Click to Houston website here. So this is from Edgy, and he says, while I appreciate the effort to help people escape domestic violence, I do think you should also highlight the law's responsibility, lack thereof, particularly when it comes to restraining orders. The irony behind a judge's order when issued, and the fact that it's at the officer's discretion to enforce it. It's tragic that I can only imagine incredibly frustrating to victims. For reference, see Jessica Lenahan versus the U.S. This is not isolated, sadly. Change the wording, make it a law.
Yeah, so back to the initial response from law enforcement and proper training and all of that. Yeah, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, one of the things to elaborate on what Maisha said, we all have the power to create a new law. So there are task forces that exist. We sit on some of those task forces for the state. Our agency creates legislation with a governance committee, and we propose that legislation. But guess what? If you see an issue with a law and you see that there needs to be something that needs to be changed, you can go to any of your elected officials and say, hey, I am a constituent. I vote every single year. I see this as an issue. I think that you need to take it seriously. And then they have a little bit more power to be able to make changes that are sustainable, that can prevent future violence from happening and to keep more survivors safe. So I wanted to say that. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, so the law, what was the law that they mentioned? Are you all familiar with that? If you could explain that. Yeah.
So a different screen. It's Jessica Lenahan. It's Lenahan versus the United States.
Familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's all right. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, you have to talk about this with your representative. And I just want to make sure we don't have any more text messages because Andrea or Jason, do you guys have any other messages that?
One, once an abuser, always an abuser, question mark. What options are available for accountability and reform?
Once an abuser, always an abuser. Can people change? Can they get help? Can people change? Can they get help?
Okay, so there are ways for abusers to
talked about this last week.
Yes, to do things differently. So ABDA does have the state's largest BIP program. That stands for Battering, Intervention, and Prevention Program. Of course, most of the people come to us as a result of the prosecutions that happen at the DA's office, so they're not usually volunteers. But all that being said, the program is designed to help facilitate change in behavior. It's psychoeducation. They're with a counselor for 18 weeks. They're in a room with people who are in similar situations as themselves. And the whole point of the program is accountability, acknowledging the behavior, acknowledging that choices have been made. Because a lot of times what happens is people do these things and sort of act as though they are surprised by their own behavior. I don't know why I did this, or this, I was drinking, or what are the, But honestly, at the end of the day, it is a choice regardless.
You're responsible for your behavior.
Absolutely. And if this behavior was modeled, it doesn't have to be something that you maintain. In your household, you should not represent what you learned as a child, and there are ways to change that.
So your responsibility to change.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's what we do. We have programs for male and female. We have programs that are dedicated to focusing on being a parent who has been abusive in their relationship. And so those are the kinds of things that a lot of people don't know exist. And so you don't have to be charged with a crime to go to BIP. You can actually sign up for BIP and acknowledge for yourself that I need help, and there are people who can actually help you to at least have a dialogue and have some options in terms of what else can I do when this happens? What else can how can I behave in a different way when this scenario comes up?
As we wind down, just real quick, just for clarification, that Jessica Lenahan, that was a case where her 3 daughters were killed when a restraining order was not enforced. And so that's where that came from.
As our time comes to close, I just want to say that based on all of the text messages and the questions that we get and all the conversations that we've had with 3 amazing panelists, there's so much more conversation to have.
For sure.
And it needs to continue. And so here at KPRC2, we are committed to that and to continue talking about these very difficult stories and cases. And so tomorrow morning on today, starting I think at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, we are going to start answering even more of your questions. We have asked more panelists to join us at these tables over here where you can call in and you can find all that information on that QR code that you see on your screen. Just grab your phone and get that QR code. It'll take you to all of the resources and information and you can ask your questions. It continues tomorrow. Jason, right?
Yeah, we have one more time for the
We start bright and early, 6 o'clock in the morning. We're going through 6:30. We're going to have almost every nonprofit, law enforcement agency, DA's offices are all, you're involved, Harris County's involved. Everybody's coming here to help out with this situation of domestic violence. And we want to remind everybody to go to clicktohouston.com to check out the Breaking Free series of stories that we have done. We want you to continue the conversation in the comments section because we know that you guys are going there looking up these individual stories, and it's very important to continue that conversation. So that's what we would like everybody to do as we see them tomorrow at 6 in the morning.
And we want to tell our viewers, like, don't lose hope.
Yes.
We are here to extend all of these resources to you. We're committed here at KPRC2 to do that.
Indeed. Okay, Amanda Elkanik-Oder, Texas Advocacy Project. Misha Coulter, AVDA, thank you so much.
Thank you
and
so
also,
much.
yes, Anthony Asso with the Harris County DA. Thank you all so much for your insight. We know this is an issue that hopefully we're just scratching the surface. We'll do much, much more.
Continue it.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.